The wind carried dust across the dry Arizona plains as Samuel walked back toward his small wooden house. It had been a long, quiet day, just like the many before it. His ranch stood miles away from the nearest town, surrounded by faded fences and an endless sky. He had built it years ago with his own hands, hoping to live a peaceful life. But peace had slowly turned into silence, and silence into loneliness. He rarely spoke to anyone except his horse and the wind that moved through the grass. That evening, as he sat by the fire and watched the shadows flicker on the walls, he thought he heard a sound outside. It was faint, almost lost in the wind. He waited, thinking it might just be the breeze brushing the door. Then it came again, 3 gentle knocks, one after another. Samuel stood slowly, confused and cautious. No one ever came this far. He opened the door, and the cold air rushed in along with 3 figures standing close together. They were young women, covered in travel dust, their faces tired but calm. The eldest stepped forward first. Her dark eyes were clear and steady, and though she looked weary, her voice did not shake. "We'll work, cook, and serve," she said quietly. "Just let us in." Samuel froze. He could see they were Apache by their dress and hair, and for a long moment his thoughts tangled between fear and sympathy. The world outside his ranch was full of mistrust. Settlers spoke harshly about the Apache, and the Apache spoke bitterly of the settlers. But here, standing in front of him, were 3 young women with no weapons, no pride, just hunger and exhaustion. He looked at the sky behind them. The sun was nearly gone, the air turning colder with every breath. He stepped aside without a word and motioned them in. They walked in slowly, glancing around as if afraid the kindness might be taken back. Samuel closed the door and added more wood to the fire. The warmth spread through the small room. The eldest introduced herself as Naya. Her sisters were Loma and Tessa. Their voices were soft, respectful, and filled with a quiet sadness. They had left their small camp 2 days earlier after raiders burned it down. They didn't speak much about the loss, only that they had been walking since then, with no food and no direction. Samuel nodded slowly. He fetched a pot of water, placed it on the stove, and took out a small piece of bread from his shelf. He divided it into 4 parts. It wasn't much, but when he handed it to them, the gratitude in their eyes said more than any words could. They sat near the fire, their hands trembling slightly from fatigue. For a long while the room stayed silent except for the sound of crackling wood. Samuel wasn't used to company, and they weren't used to kindness. Still, something unspoken settled between them, a kind of trust born out of need. When they finished eating, Naya spoke again. "We can clean. We can cook. We can take care of the animals. Just let us stay until we find where to go." Samuel didn't answer right away. He looked at his old house, the unwashed dishes, the dust-covered shelves, the worn chair by the window. He had lived like this for years. Maybe it was time to have someone around who could make it feel like home again. "You can stay," he said quietly. "For now." That night, the 3 sisters slept near the fire while Samuel sat in his chair, half awake, listening to the soft sound of their breathing. He realized it had been a long time since the house had felt alive. The next morning began differently than any other. Before sunrise, the smell of something warm reached Samuel's nose. When he stepped out of his room, he saw the 3 sisters busy around the small kitchen. Naya stirred a pot on the stove, Loma swept the floor with quiet focus, and Tessa, the youngest, was carefully folding his shirts that had been left untouched for months. "Morning," Samuel said softly. They smiled shyly, and Naya offered him a bowl of soup made from leftover grain and wild herbs they had found near the stream. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and tasted better than anything he had eaten in a long time. Over the next days, everything began to change. The sisters filled the empty silence with gentle laughter and calm energy. They cleaned every corner, patched up old curtains, and even planted small wildflowers outside the window. Samuel found himself watching them with quiet wonder. When he came back from the fields in the evenings, the smell of cooked food welcomed him. Loma was always good with animals. She could calm even the most stubborn horse with her soft voice. Tessa sang while she worked, a soft tune in Apache that made the air feel lighter. And Naya always made sure Samuel ate before she did. At first, Samuel wasn't sure how to speak to them, but day by day, words began to come easier. He taught them how to saddle the horses, how to repair the fence, how to tell when rain was coming by looking at the sky. In return, they taught him things too. how to track small signs in the sand, how to make natural tea from desert roots, how to use plants to soothe burns and tired muscles. There were moments of laughter, too. One afternoon, Samuel tried to show Tessa how to use a lasso, but she swung it too soon and caught her own foot. She laughed so hard that even Samuel couldn't help smiling. It had been years since he had laughed like that. In the evenings, when the sun dipped behind the distant hills, the four of them sat by the fire. Naya often told stories from her people, about stars that guided lost souls, about rivers that carried songs. Samuel listened quietly, feeling a strange warmth spread through his heart. He had once thought that kindness was something small, but now he realized it could change everything. However, word travels fast even across the quiet plains. One morning, while Samuel was mending a gate, he noticed two riders far down the trail. They didn't come close that day, but he knew what it meant. People were talking. Some settlers had begun to whisper that Samuel was sheltering Apache women. He didn't care much for gossip, but the world outside wasn't kind to those who tried to bridge its divides. That evening, Samuel sat outside and watched the sunset. Naya came and stood beside him. She knew without asking. "We can leave if you wish," she said softly. "We don't want to bring trouble." Samuel shook his head slowly. "You've brought peace, not trouble." His voice was low but steady. "And I've had enough loneliness for one lifetime." Naya smiled faintly and looked toward the horizon. "Then we'll stay," she whispered. The days after that passed quietly, but something had changed. There was a sense of belonging in the air. The sisters moved with more confidence, and Samuel found himself humming when he worked. The ranch began to look alive again, fences straight, windows clean, and the scent of warm bread drifting out each morning. One night, when the stars shone bright above, Tessa played a simple tune on a small wooden flute she carried. The notes rose softly through the still night. Samuel sat on the porch, eyes closed, listening. It felt like the sound filled every empty place inside him. That was the moment he realized that these three sisters were no longer strangers. They had become the heart of his home. The soft sound of morning birds woke Samuel before the sun came up. The ranch looked peaceful, touched by the golden light rising over the hills. He walked out to the porch and saw Naya drawing water from the well, while her sisters fed the chickens. Their laughter blended with the sounds of the waking land. It was simple, quiet, and beautiful. For the first time in years, Samuel felt that his home truly had life again. He went to the barn and began repairing a loose plank on the stall. Loma joined him, holding the nails and smiling as she handed them one by one. She had grown comfortable at the ranch, and her calm nature made even the horses more gentle. Samuel noticed how naturally she moved, as if she had always belonged there. He thought of how strange it was that three strangers could come into his life and turn loneliness into peace without asking for anything in return. When he finished his work, they all sat down for breakfast together. The smell of cornbread and coffee filled the air. Tessa, the youngest, was always cheerful. She hummed while she worked and often teased Samuel gently about how he never smiled enough. Sometimes he tried to hide his grin, but they always caught him. The warmth around that small table felt like family. As the days passed, life followed a soft rhythm. Each person had their tasks, and everyone worked together. Naya often helped Samuel with repairs around the property. Loma looked after the animals and the small vegetable patch they had started. Tessa loved to cook and decorate the table with flowers she picked from the nearby meadow. Every corner of the ranch slowly changed under their care. The windows shone brighter, the fields grew greener, and laughter could be heard from sunrise to sunset. But beyond their small world, the whispers grew louder. When Samuel rode to town for supplies, he noticed people looking at him differently. Some didn't speak, some nodded coldly, and others muttered under their breath. He didn't respond. He bought what he needed and left quietly, not wanting to feed the gossip. Still, it followed him back like dust on his boots. That evening, when he returned, the sisters noticed the worry on his face. They didn't ask, but Naya sensed it. She spoke gently as they sat by the fire. "People don't always understand kindness," she said. "But that does not mean kindness is wrong." Her words stayed with him long after the fire had burned low. As winter faded into spring, the land began to bloom again. Rain fell gently over the fields, and the sound of water brought joy to the dry earth. Samuel worked with Loma to fix the fence line, and Tessa sang while she hung laundry to dry. It was a picture of peace that Samuel had never dreamed possible. One afternoon, travelers passed by the ranch, an older couple on their way to the next town. They stopped to rest by the well, and Naya offered them water and food. They thanked her warmly, surprised by her generosity. Before leaving, the woman said softly to Samuel, "You have good hearts here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." That simple kindness felt like a small gift from fate. Weeks later, when Samuel returned from town again, he brought back seeds and fabric. He had traded some of his cattle for these things. He wanted the sisters to have what they needed. Tessa's eyes sparkled when she saw the fabric. "We can make curtains," she said, "bright ones for the windows." Soon the house looked like a place of color and warmth. Curtains fluttered in the breeze, the garden bloomed with wildflowers, and laughter filled the air every evening. Samuel began to forget about the outside world. He didn't care what others thought. His ranch was a home again, and the sisters were part of it. One early morning, a thin fog covered the valley. Naya stood by the doorway, looking toward the horizon. Samuel noticed her expression. "What is it?" he asked softly. "Memories," she said. "Sometimes they come back when the world is quiet." She told him about their home near the river before everything changed. About their parents, about laughter by the campfire, about the songs her mother used to sing. Her voice was gentle, filled with both pain and peace. Samuel listened in silence. When she finished, he said, "You've made new memories here. The land remembers kindness too." She smiled faintly and nodded. As time went on, trust deepened between them. Samuel never treated the sisters as servants. They worked together as equals. He often found himself talking to them about his past, how he lost his parents early, how he tried to build something lasting on this lonely land. Naya listened with quiet understanding. Loma offered gentle encouragement, and Tessa always found a way to make him laugh at the end. Their bond became unspoken but strong. They didn't need to explain it to anyone. When Samuel was tired from a long day, Tessa would bring him water. When the wind grew cold, Loma would mend his old coat without being asked. And every evening, Naya made sure there was warm food waiting by the fire. The small things became their way of saying they cared. One afternoon, a few local farmers stopped by the ranch. They came not with anger, but with curiosity. They had heard the stories and wanted to see for themselves. Samuel greeted them politely. The sisters stayed nearby, continuing their work without fear. The men noticed the neat fences, the healthy animals, and the beautiful garden. It didn't look like a place of trouble, it looked like a place of peace. One of the men finally said, "You've done well here." Samuel nodded, his voice calm. "I didn't do it alone." After that day, something shifted. The gossip began to fade, replaced by quiet respect. People realized there was no harm in what they had built. A few even began to visit, sharing food and trading goods. The sisters welcomed everyone kindly, and their gentle manners softened even the hardest hearts. As summer arrived, the ranch thrived. They harvested vegetables, repaired the roof, and even built a small shelter for passing travelers. Samuel could hardly recognize the place anymore. It wasn't just a ranch now. It was a small corner of hope in a world that often forgot how to be kind. One night, as the stars glittered across the sky, they all sat outside on the porch. The air was cool, and the crickets sang softly in the distance. Tessa leaned against the post, playing her flute. The melody was soft and sweet, drifting through the night air like a lullaby. Naya smiled at Samuel. "When we came here, we only asked for shelter," she said. "But you gave us a home." Samuel looked at them quietly, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "You gave it meaning," he replied. "This place was only wood and stone before you came." The sisters fell silent for a moment, touched by his words. The night seemed to hold its breath. Loma whispered, "Maybe this is where we were meant to be." From that day on, no one spoke of leaving. The ranch belonged to all of them now. They worked together, shared meals, and faced each season side by side. People from nearby farms began calling it the Peace Ranch, a place where everyone was welcome. Years later, travelers passing through still spoke of the lonely man who once lived by himself in the desert, and how 3 Apache sisters changed his life. They said his ranch was a place of laughter and warmth, where kindness was stronger than fear. And though many years passed, some still remembered that cold winter evening when 3 tired young women stood at a stranger's door and said, We'll work, cook, and serve. Just let us in. And because he opened that door, none of them were ever lonely again.